Hi there, I'm Dr. Kelly Clarke, and today I wanted to talk a little bit about managing some of those behaviors that become annoying for us as parents that happen again and again. They're not too explosive or too difficult, but how do we approach some of these behaviors that we do day in and day out that we have to manage with our kids? And in particular, I'm going to talk about elementary type of ages and how to kind of use a philosophy to engage with our kids' difficult behaviors, especially when they're repetitive, like things like not brushing teeth or showering or not wanting to go to school or do homework, these kind of things. How do we deal with these kind of things? And I think it's important for us to think about and have a philosophy on how to deal with these kind of things. Because if we don't, we end up employing old patterns of behavior, like and to the point of even frustration or yelling, and we've become ineffective as parents. And I've been there. We've all been there. I have been one person that's benefited from reading several child rearing books, parenting books, especially when my kids were little and you're having difficulties with, okay, how do we actually potty train and these kind of things that most people don't think about, but somebody wrote a book about it. And I found it funny that a lot of the times that these parenting experts would give advice in the book and they would give an example of their own kind of difficulty with their kid, it almost always put them in a positive light. And, so they would be some kind of fairly small issue that they would first say, I had some difficulties with, but then I ended up finding a solution that worked for us all. And I noticed that often it just kind of made them look better. I don't want to do that. I want to be right in there with the mix to realize and to say that just like everybody out there, even somebody such as myself I worked for 20 years with highly disturbed emotionally behavioral challenged kids. I've got a PhD in child development and all of the psychology that a lot of people would probably like to have in dealing with kids, and have to admit myself that, boy, there's some times where I'm just kind of at a loss what to deal with my kids at sometimes. So I think that for me, I want to set myself up well rather than feeling powerless. And when that happens, I often get frustrated, and then, the yelling comes out and the not good dad behavior comes out. And so I just wanted to kind of speak a little bit about that and say it's okay as well. All of us have had those moments where we felt we didn't do a great job. I mean, as long as we're not, going way too far, yelling, screaming, and shaming our children and or, being physical or things that clearly most of us know we shouldn't be doing. A lot of us for the line is just, boy, I just yelled too much and I don't want to be that angry parent. So I just wanted to talk about a few of those things today. So I guess the first thing I want to talk about is, well, things like brushing their teeth more. Why do I have to keep reminding something we do every day? How come it's a difficulty that, this is not a surprise. We do this every morning, every night. How come they just can't usher themselves up there, these between 6 and 12-year-olds? And so the first thing I want to say is that, instead of kind of asking the idea, how do I stop this behavior or how do I increase the behavior necessarily, we might want to take a look at kind of the need, understand the perspective of our child first. Like, for example, if they're having a play activity before bed, none of my kids want to go to bed. So they're now having to say goodbye to a preferred activity. The first thing I want to do always and try to get all of us to think about is to understand things from their perspective. So understanding's always, better than if their kid is just being defiant. They just don't want to brush their teeth. They're just being rude to me and disrespectful. First of all, I want to realize that it's difficult for every kid to make a transition from a preferred activity. Going to bed, well, now they're saying goodbye to the day. Now they're saying goodbye to maybe watching TV, to playing with their brother or sister, to hanging out with you. So it's difficult for them. There's a little bit of a sadness and difficulty. So they might have some difficulties also regulating their emotions. They might have difficulties problem solving if they have multiple things they want to do at the end before the night for us to help kind of structure it a little bit more for them. Or they may lack self-control. They're just not great at controlling these impulses. And so trying to understand our kids first, I think, is an important thing. And also to that end, I think it's so useful. We are experts on our kids, right? And so I think one of the rules in managing or helping our kids manage their behaviors is realizing their own temperament and their personality to some degree, because some kids are highly sensitive. Those emotional, more sensitive types of individuals, those kids I don't want to be so hard on and so kind of repetitive. And I told you this before, making commentating on their behavior, like, this is the sixth time I've seen it. We've all done it, including me. This is the fourth time I'm saying this. Well, if we're doing that, now we're commentating their behavior. Imagine yourself. I also want to think, I put myself in this perspective all the time. If I were in their shoes and now I'm hearing the same thing 4 times again, why are you not listening to me again? What would that feel like? How would I take that feedback? Often, when we're saying things or I'm saying things, this is the 3rd time I've said this, I would take that as criticism, like you're being critical, or you're not listening to me again. So, if at the bottom of that is you're not listening again, you're not obeying, you're kind of messing up. And at the very lowest end, you're kind of doing bad stuff. I think that message gets filtered down to that bottom level. So rather than me repeating and commentating and saying these things again, how about we employ a better way, before we even get to that moment? So one of the first things I wanted to talk about is natural causes, logical consequences, these kind of things. And some of the things that I do, and again, I'm lumping myself, we're all there, we're all human, especially when we get frustrated. One of the things that I notice that I do when I start getting frustrated is I start nagging. In other words, what's nagging? I'm repeating myself 2-3 times, or I'm repackaging an argument that I think my kid's going to get. Like, this makes logical sense that, we should, we brush our teeth because it prevents germs and prevents cavities. When I was a kid, I had 3 cavities. So I'm, pontificating this great explanation as to why you should brush the teeth. And all of this is going over their head. They don't care. They don't want to brush their teeth. They're saying goodbye to the rest of the day. They don't want to do it. So why am I going on to this elaborate monologue about how the rationale, I'm trying to prove that brushing their teeth is something they're doing? Now, maybe a little of that is a good idea, but what I want to get back to is that anytime we're talking too much, restating something again, we're getting onto that naggy, we're getting onto repetitive, we're getting onto commentating. And I think what that eventually gets down to our kids is they how do you take that? You either take it as a positive, dad's saying something to me again and again and again. Well, how are they going to take that as a positive? He's repetitively saying thing. They probably take it to the negative. He has to say it again. I'm not obeying. I'm not listening. Therefore, what does this say about them? I'm kind of a poor listening kid. It's something negative. So rather than to get into all that loop, rather than getting to that naggy commentating, notice first, as I try to notice, oh boy, I'm saying the same thing twice. I'm repackaging it, but it's still the same thing. Just then employ, a intervention strategy to deal with that. So for example, the case of brushing the teeth, and again, I messed it up. I remember, there's 2 ways we could deal with this. One is that if you don't get upstairs and brush your teeth, then I'm going to take something away. Which, when you take something away, like, a positive thing like watching TV or maybe time with a friend, that's called punishment. We're taking away something to reduce the problematic behavior. So any punishment is when we apply something or we take away something. So apply means positive punishment. Taking away is negative punishment. So I'm going to take something away to decrease the likelihood of this behavior, that is, you not brushing your teeth. Whereas reinforcement is applying or taking away something to increase the likelihood of behavior. So in that moment with brushing teeth, I thought, okay, I'm not going to take away. For example, I said to them one night, if you don't get your teeth brushed, then I'm going to have you go to bed a half an hour earlier the next night, which is not a bad consequence. But you probably know this, that positive, or rather reinforcement, is a much stronger motivator, and it doesn't lead to resentment. Problem with punishment often leads to resentment. So when I say, yep, you're going to get a half an hour early bed, my kid's going to have a little resentment. Dang. It probably is going to get them to motivate to get up there and brush their teeth, but it's a little bit more resentment. It's better, as in the case of what I did one night with my 2 boys. I said, okay, how about if the 2 of you guys get up there and finish brushing your teeth the fastest, I'm going to give you a reward, and whatever the reward was. So now they ran upstairs and they made it a competition so that they're elbowing each other. And now I got a new problem. I created the application of giving them a positive reward for something, now it turned out in competitive thing. And so in hindsight, I went, so I actually tried again saying, okay, wait a second. I want you, now I'm again applying a reinforcement. If you do this, I'm going to give you five more minutes, watching TV or, maybe playing a video game or hanging out with your friend tomorrow. So now the positive reinforcement of which all of us know there's things that our kids like to do. We use those as rewarding or reinforcing behaviors. So this time I said, if you can get up there, each of you, and beat your previous time by 1 minute, I'm going to give you that reward. So now it was individual. No, I don't have the competition. What I'm getting at is that in the moment, in the fly, a lot of us struggle with coming up with a consequence or a behavior or a strategy that's going to be effective. And I just wanted to also let you know that I do too, and I've got a lot of years of dealing with problematic teenagers and those kind of things. And it still is difficult. So what I'm getting at is that if you have some philosophy realizing that, yes, punishment works, it will reduce the likelihood of behavior. If you apply something like, I'm going to make you clean. Now I'm going to make you clean the whole kitchen. The sink area because you didn't brush your teeth on time. Say something like that, punishment. You applied something, or versus negative punishment, which is taking away. Since you didn't get that done in time, I'm going to have you go to bed early the next night. So again, that can work, but it builds more resentment. Kids don't respond to it as well as reinforcement. In truth, our family probably does more of the punishment style, where we take something away or we apply, you're going to re-clean this because you didn't clean it appropriately, to get them to favorably do things that we think is good for them. So back to reinforcement, though, this is something I try to do. I try to, do that rewarding behavior. The other thing is natural and logical consequences. So oftentimes we want to make something connected to the behavior that we're trying to augment or improve. So for example, if my child does not want to shower before going to bed at night, and so if I then say, well, I'm going to take away, back to punishment, I'm going to take away your play date tomorrow, or I'm going to take away your video time, be playing Roblox or something for half an hour tomorrow. So again, I'm using punishment and taking it away, but it's not at all logically connected to the shower. So it's better if we have a logical consequence, a behavior, an intervention that is connected to the behavior we're trying to improve or augment. So in the case of a child who doesn't want to shower, say they came up to you and said, yeah, I showered, and then I checked to smell the hair, and it's definitely not showered. So now they've also not told me the truth. So now what am I going to do with that? So back to logical, natural consequences. So in the case of, I remember one time with me, when I was 13, I went and raced a motocross race, and then I didn't wash my hair. And the next day I went to school, grade 8, like, what was I thinking? Grade 8, I went to school, didn't wash my hair. It's all straggly and greasy. One of my best friends ridiculed me for the whole day. I guarantee you, I never did that again, because as a natural consequence, me not washing my hair, I got ridiculed by a friend of mine. So, in some ways, sometimes our peers will help to naturally teach us things that we need to learn. So in the case of my sons who don't shower, then I might say something logically connected to that. Well, here's your choice. You can either not shower rather than get in a big power struggle. I don't want to do it. I'm not going to do it. Okay, well, if you don't do it tonight, then you will be doing it for the rest of the week every day. We typically have our kids shower every second day. So might logically connect it. Well, if you don't do that, then it's going to happen every day from now on. And then I would probably also get them to shower before a rewarding experience. So that is like they're going to go play soccer with their friends. Well, first now you got to shower before you do it. So having that kind of a logical connection to the actual behavior you're trying to change. So in the case of when the son lies or the daughter lies or the child lies to you, yeah, I washed my hair. Oh, I smell it. So I am not a big fan of heaping a massive consequence on lying, because when the consequence becomes too big, that now reinforces the behavior of lying. They don't want to get caught because there's such a big behavior with it. So we still want to teach, morally it's not okay to lie. So something like, what happened with lying is that you broke my trust. So since I can't trust you as much, I'm not going to give you the freedoms that I typically would give tomorrow. So you could come up with something like that on your own, right? So that you broke my trust. I trusted you there. So when they'll say, hey, Dad, can I go and walk to my friends by myself that's just down the block? Well, I can't really trust that you're not going to, take off and go somewhere else. So no, I'm not going to permit that. So again, logically connected to the behavior you're trying to augment, natural logical consequences. Oftentimes, natural consequences take care of themselves well. You did a classic example. One of my kids will tell me, I get free time in school if I get my homework done by Friday. So we will gently remind them, hey, did you get your homework done Monday? Nope. Okay. Well, that by Friday, if you don't get it done, you're not going to have that free time. Yep. So we might remind them every day, but ultimately, when Friday comes and he enjoys that preferred time of being able to do something on his own, and he hasn't done it, it's a natural consequence. I have to do less teaching. I shouldn't remind him 5 times a day. I shouldn't become, his homework penalizer. Just let natural consequences deal it. So what I'm getting at is kind of like pick the areas that you actually need to intervene on. A lot of times natural consequences just sort themselves out. So thinking about things like natural consequences, logical consequences, should I use punishment instead of reinforcement? These are some of the things that are interesting and that we want to consider with our children. And I think it's also important to realize that, a lot of things can be taken care of naturally, but when we do need to intervene, some strategies are really effective if we think about intentionally using them as guidance. Here's one thing I wanted to also mention, when we notice our own reactivity really jumping up, so the voice starts to get louder, yelling. I mean, I've had at this point now thousands of opportunities to talk to kids that become adults in the assessments that I do. And I'll often hear people talk about what it was like being parented by their parents. And invariably, when they become parents, they want to steer away from things they didn't like that their parents did. So I've had so many of these opportunities to hear feedback on how children were raised and now are adults. And one of the things they'll say, things are like this, that my parents would, things like they would never apologize when they made a mistake. And now this person will apologize. They wanted to teach the value of, if I mess up, I want to take responsibility and show that to my child that this is an important value. Another thing that I was just recently, somebody told me that when somebody, when they parented, they didn't want to yell and be loud all the time because their parents were loud, yelling type of people. So they had that one tone to the point that it starts losing its effectiveness. So just wanting to also challenge us as parents that when we have big reactions rather than responses, this is saying something about me, saying something about us. So in the case of when a child is not listening, this, of course, then the parent will want to say, well, this kid's not listening. It justifies me being angry. Well, yeah, I understand those feelings. But when you also have to realize that there is a component that is your material. So in the parent that wasn't listened to very well as a kid and now are not being listened to as an adult, and that really sets a trigger for them, you have to realize that, oh yeah, that's an old painful thing for me. I have to be careful that I don't let that amplify into my current life with my child, realizing that's a sore spot for me. So rather than respond reactively and loudly and with, too much anger, recognize that's when I have big reactions, it's usually about me. It's usually about something that I have, an old past hurt, a wound. So again, being more intentional and going back to, rather than making it about this person, your child, offending you and hurt you and disrespecting you, let's go back to the actual behavior that we want to change, label the behavior and say, okay, how can I strategize to increase the skill, to increase the likelihood that the behavior is going to improve or change? And so I wanted to introduce just a few ideas. Using punishment does work. It's not as effective as reinforcement. And then we also can think about natural and logical consequences. When we do set a consequence, let's make sure that it fits the behavior. So when the child throws a ball through the window, grounding them for a week is not logically connected to breaking the window. So in the case of breaking the window, let's get them to pay for the window. If they don't have money, then you can get them working around the yard to pay for the window that you are now paying them for the yard work they're doing. So we're wanting to make it logically connected to make sense, because kids will get frustrated. Well, why am I grounded for 2 weeks? How does that make sense? Why not a week? Why not 1 day? So logical connections are much easier for kids to it doesn't increase the resentment as much, makes more sense to them, and will be closer. I want to, end with this. I want to end with, when we talk too much, when we dominate the conversation, when we use our own anger, as justification for a certain course towards our kids. I think about this often. My kids right now are, they're young. And in some sense, they have to listen. Where else are they going to go? They're not going to pack their bags up and leave my house because I'm the adult, they're kids. So in that sense, we have a lot of power as adults, as parents. When they turn 13, 14, even 12, 15, they don't have to listen to us. They don't have to comply as much as they don't have to. I mean, they can become passive aggressive, go to their rooms, never interact with us. So I want us to think about, how do I want a parent now that is going to keep them in relationship with me later? If we are domineering because we've got all the power, we got a louder voice, and we use all that, eventually that resentment is going to equal into distance. It's going to equal into not being close and connected with us as parents. That is absolutely not something I want. So I wanted to get us to think about now, what are behaviors that are going to help them to feel like this makes sense, that it's just not my parent just getting mad and losing their mind again, which I think all of us have been there, including myself. And these are just a few tips to think about when we're thinking about parenting. I'm Dr. Kelly Clarke. For more information, you can take a look at drkellyclarke.com. Thank you. I'm an Edmonton psychologist, and it is nice to have this time with you.